name is Nguyen. I'm the division manager for terrestrial laser scanning segment. This webinar is going to be very useful, and hopefully you'll find some useful information here. If not a lot, a little, whatever the case is. But let me see one more thing before I start. I'm trying to find a video. Okay, here we go. All right, so this webinar is going to be about efficiency, right? So scanning with the VZ400i. It's a fast scanner, but you got to have your setup properly, and you got to have your control layout properly. And we'll talk about all that. We'll talk about the settings in the scanner. We'll talk about some of the most of all the workflow and the settings on the scanner, and also on the back end, post-registration too as well. So you know how the scanner can register the data on board, but they can also continue the registration in RiSCAN PRO, particularly bring it into server control, right? So here we go. Let's just get started with the agenda. The VZ400 workflow settings, so we'll go over all the settings in the workflow only. So the scanner has a bunch of other settings, but for the field practice and field data acquisition, we're going to go over the settings inside the scanner. And also project planner. This is important, right? So in the past, we were forced to lay out a lot of control out in the field, but with the new workflow, onboard registration, and also the robustness of our registration processing in RiSCAN PRO, we can reduce the amount of controls necessary out in the field because we're using all the data to register itself together. And in a sense, that's also a mean of control tool as well. In the past, you had to resection every single scan position, which took a long time because you had to scan all the targets in. You also had to set up accordingly so that you can see the past 3 targets and then moving forward 3 targets too as well. So it was just a number of targets that's necessary. And now with the new workflow, hardware and also software, we can greatly reduce the amount of control. And the project I'm going to show you on, it's 1 mile, right? So it's a benchmark that I've used and done many times, and it seems to work out pretty well. So we're going to work on a 1 mile project, linear project, and this linear project can work on buildings or roads or bridges. The principle is still the same, and the target setup is still the same. Just some of the key important factors that I want to mention will be set in here to set up control. And then post-processing, the post-registration, right? I don't want to call it post-processing because the scanner already stitches everything together on board. So we're going to look at the post-processing where we tie down the control to, the data to server control, or continue the registration that the scanner was not able to finish on board. So, and then we'll look at one tool that I like is the one-touch processing wizard. Now, the one-touch processing wizard can go a long way, and that's a whole webinar on its own. And I'll make one that go over all the tasks. I think there's up to 14, 16 tasks. So I'm not going to go over all the tasks, but I'm going to go over one of them that removes the car. And more importantly, I'm going to show you the settings that I have liked to use or in using. Okay, so here we go. All right, so you put the scanner on, and if you don't already have a workflow set up, here's just a quick run through in detail. So, and the settings are pretty straightforward and simple, right? So these scanners are really made to be user-friendly, reduce the amount of clicks, and more importantly, just one-touch operation, right? So once you have everything set up, it's really a one-touch operation. So you click on the workflow, and the first settings you have is the project georeferencing. So it's just as simple as clicking in automatic. Yeah, sure, you can register your data down to server control in near real time, but that could cause problems, right? So let's say we don't have the right a blown control that's out in the field, your registration is going to stop, right? So the automatic registration is very sensitive, meaning that everything has to go perfectly, right? So you got to have, you got to move the scanner accordingly. You got to have a sufficient overlap, and then your control's got to have the offset file applied to it, which is the height value. So I like to do all that in post-processing. So by having just the georeferencing using the onboard GNSS receiver or the external GNSS receiver, whether it's RTK or just L1, it doesn't matter. As long as you have GPS, it's going to work very well. And then the next setting I have is the pause estimation. This is simple. You just want to have it on fast. There's two other options, is on dedicated or accurate, right? So you don't get better information, right? What that means is that before it scans, it will do a pause estimation first, and then it scans. It does not give you better values, especially for GPS, especially if you're using L1. You do not get a better value. You do not get a better value by putting it on dedicated or accurate. So fast is the recommended way to do it, because as it's scanning, it's estimating its roll pitch yaw value as it's scanning. So it's not necessary to do it before or after or on every scan. If as long as you're doing a 360 scan, have it on fast is the best recommendation for the settings. GNSS accuracy limit. Now, yeah, you can put a limit on there, but if you're using RTK, sure, no problem, meaning that it will not scan unless it reaches 2 centimeters or whatever value you put in there. So if you put it on 0, it'll always scan regardless of what GPS values you have. So if you use an RTK, yeah, sure, you can put a GPS accuracy limits on there up to 2 centimeters, and no problem, it won't scan until the GPS position reaches 2 centimeters or better. Compass accuracy limit. So I don't recommend to put any value on here, because the heading is always going to be out, right? It uses a magnetic digital compass. So if you're around metal, if you have to see mount on top of a vehicle, your heading is always going to be out. But don't worry, because if you scan more than one position, most 100% time you probably will do, and with a sufficient overlap, whether it's indoor or outdoor, your heading will be solved when the data stitches itself together. Because during that time, it does a rotation. It does not, and when the data matches together, it can only fit one way, and your data will have a proper heading. So having it at 0 is highly recommended on the compass accuracy limits. The next setting is scanner configuration. Yeah, this one can go a little bit more detail, but have the settings I have on here is the best practice for point density versus scan time and for road projects, right? So yeah, one settings I can turn on here is the scan pattern. Now, by reducing the scan pattern, and that could be different scenarios, right? So if you're doing a very detailed BIM project for indoor scanning, sure, why not? Make it panorama 20 or 30, but of course, that's going to increase your scan time, right? So again, this example is for outdoor road profiling, road scanning. So panorama 40 will give you approximately 7 centimeters at 100 meter point spacing, and at 1200 kilohertz, that'll give you 250 meter range. So that has equaled out to optimal scan time and also optimal point spacing for any kind of road profile projects. And this data has been proven, has been tested by all of our users. And on top of that, by bringing it into a third-party software like Certainty 3D or any kind of CAD platform, the data was sufficient enough as far as point spacing and then scan time. So this scan pattern at panorama 40, again, is 7 centimeters at 100 meter point spacing, vertical and horizontal, and it also only will cost you 46 seconds, right? 46 seconds, and that also includes the imagery too as well. So in 45 seconds, this thing will complete a 360-degree scans and take images too as well. Motion detector and shock detector sensitivity Sure, no problem. You can put it on high, medium, or low. So by putting it on high, it detects very sensitive. So if you any kind of movement will make it go off, and then you're gonna have to delete that scan pattern and then go on. So medium seems to be the best settings I've had used in the last many years. Automatic scan increment. Yep, I always have this checked. It's because as soon as you move the scanner will automatically create a scan position on its own. I've heard a horror story where the user will bring a scan and forgets to enable the scan automatic increment and also forgets to press the next scan position. So what happens? He'll scan 50 scan position on scan position 1. That's a nightmare for processing. Sure, we can separate them, and there is a way to do it, but it's going to take many, many hours to do so, depending on the scale of the project, right? So it's best to have it detected automatically and increment automatically as you scan along the project. And of course, safe scan, it's a must. The next setting is registration settings. Now, this can go both ways, right? So I like to have it so that the automatic registration is enabled by myself during each project, right? The reason why I like this is because sometimes you have this enabled, it will automatically start the registration automatically without any without you asking. Now, so, you know, I've seen it from experience. I've seen people go out and the first couple scan positions are always, I don't know, I'm not saying always, but it could be bad where they don't set up properly, or they forgot to survey control in, or they forgot, you know, to do certain things, or the GPS was out for some reason and they forgot to check the GPS, right? Or they weren't getting corrections from a VRS network, RTK correction. So that's why I like to have it unchecked and then enable it after the first or second scan position, which I'm going to show you in a little bit here, or towards the end if I have time, because I do have my scanner hooked up and I have already taken a couple scans. But hey, if you do want to have it checked, no problem, have it checked, and then pick your scene, right? So it's very important to pick the right scene project scenario. It's because of the search radius, the voxel size, and the accuracy of each point, right? So if you're working in a open pit mining environment where you don't have many planes, or you're working in a non-urban environment where forestry, you know, your search radius is going to be very short, your voxel size is going to be very small, and your accuracy accuracy tolerance is going to be very high. So it's best to always pick the proper scenario for the proper scan environment that you're working in, right? Of course, this could be changed too as well. That's why I like to do it after the first couple of scans, because it allows me to pick the right scenario and also make sure the first couple of scan positions are good, so that I can be confident that the continuing scan position 2, 3, and 4 are all good to go. So, but nevertheless, if you do check it, make sure you pick your right scenario, and also check resolve MTA, because at 1200 kilohertz, you will cause an MTA issue. It's because multiple times around for the max distance of 250 meters, and there's targets in between. Continuing on with our workflow settings, we have next the reflector search, right? I like to have this off because we don't need a target on every scan position, right? If you have this on, what it's going to do is it's going to take time to search the scene, or search the data rather, for reflected targets. And if you don't need it, you don't need to use it. You do it afterwards, right? So as you're scanning, that's when you do it, when you need it, right? So you want to start at the first position with targets, and of course you want to end the scan position with targets, and then supplements in between, which we'll go over in detail and the feature of this presentation. But please always at least select your reflector type. You can select multiple reflector types. In the search mode, I recommend to use model instead of simple, right? So model will narrow down the type of targets that you're using, so it doesn't find many false negative. If you use the simple, you're setting parameters, search distance, and also target type and target size. So not target type, just target size. Yeah. So it's best if you use the model, which will then reduce significantly the amount of false negative, false positive that the scanner detects from the point cloud. But nevertheless, again, I like to have it off because we don't need a search on every single scan position. And again, by having it on, it will search on every single scan position. Of course, there are other, if you scroll up on the menu, there are also different type of reflectors you can use. The one I showed you are just all flat reflectors, which are just a sticky type, or you can put on a pin and tilt. Or the second type, or rather the second type out of three, are the cylindrical targets, which come standard with our terrestrial laser scanning kit, whether it's 50 millimeter or 100 millimeter or 10 centimeter. And of course, prism is used too as well. So if you're in a mining open pit environment, yeah, you can use prism. But please be sure that the prism is at optimal distance so that the scanner can detect it. Otherwise, if it's too close, the intensity that comes back from the reflector prism will not kill the scanner, but it will not pick it up because it would then cause a line in the data where the prism is because the return value is way too high for the scanner's receiving mirror, right? It will still scan, but it will not detect that target and will just cause a no data on the small port of the data, right? So make sure if you're using the prism, having an optimal distance so that the scanner can pick it up at long range. And the next setting is reflector scans. Now, this goes in parallel with reflector search, right? So you definitely want to have this off too as well. It's because if the scanner does detect any false targets, it will try to make an attempt to find scan it. Now, of course, if it picks up false targets, no big deal. It's because in the registration processing, it will not match with any of the control. Is because it does not pick out the targets based on naming convention. It based off of distance and angles, right? So a couple things I want to note is that you don't have to label your targets properly according to your server control. So if you have server control marked 00C, your targets in the field does not have to be marked 00C. It doesn't matter what the naming is, right? As long as it's placed over that nail, the offset is proper, the registration will find itself. So man, my point is that leave this off because it will find false target. But if it does find false target, it doesn't matter, but because it won't register and use that server control, right? Not because it knows that, hey, it's not a target. It simply is because of the distance from the scanner and from the data, and also distance and angle from in relation from each target to the control file. Yep. And the last thing I want to go over is image acquisition. So this is a neat feature that was released a few years ago, and it's been one of the most let me see, advanced. It's pretty advanced, right? So out of all the systems I've used and learned and understand, I believe the VZ400i is the only one that I'm aware of that can take images at the same time. Now, what does this do? Mainly productivity, right? So instead of, and timing, right? So instead of waiting for the scanner to finish and then also waiting for the image to be captured, which sometimes images, depending on the overlap, it can take anywhere from 6 to, hundreds of images, right? We would never do hundreds of images because, we would never have an overlap so high because it's not necessary. We use a Decon D850 with a 20 millimeter prime lens, which is not a fisheye lens. So you get less distortion and parallels effects. So by having a 12% overlap, you're taking approximately 8 images for every single scan position. So as the scanner is done, it automatically takes the images too as well, right? And the last setting I want to show you is save, right? So after you've done your setting, you save it. And you can have as many workflow configuration as you want. And it gives you a chance to name it. I'm going to name this one outdoor. And so every single time I'm working a project outdoor, I'm going to go ahead and select that in the workflow and boom, start scanning. Yep. Okay. So as you're scanning, I want to bring up one thing. We'll go over that when it gets to the next 2 slides. It'll be better sense. So before we begin scanning, we want to go ahead and plan our projects, right? So here's a project that I recently done. It's about approximately 1 mile of frontage road, 2 lanes, east and westbound, right? So overall project, I set out 16 survey control that were RTK'd in and also level 2 as well. So, you know, the data registration is going to be good. You're going to get out what you put in, right? So if you're running a project like this, if you're building roads, and if you just serve it at RTK, if you don't level it, you're not going to, you're not going to have good Z value, good height, good elevation value, yeah? Because RTK, let's face it, it's all relative. GPS is completely relative from one day to another. So if you don't level this in, you're not going to have a good day data to set your control. Sorry, you're not going to have good residuals when you tie down the data to the server control, right? So please always level your project, especially if you're building roads, especially if you're doing linear project. Even if you don't do linear project, the only time I can see RTK comes to play if you're doing an alto survey, right? So if you just go and do an alto survey, no problem. You can put the RTK right on top of the scanner. You don't even need targets out there if you just do an alto survey, because RTK is good enough for an alto survey, really. So yeah, my point is, please level all your project. It will pay off at the end, and plus it's best practice anyway. So for surveying, and then on this project, I set approximately 800 feet from both sides of the road. What I mean by that, so from each set of control, it's approximately 800 feet. You can make it 500 feet if you want, right? So this is just, again, best practice for me that I've had experience and have very good experience on many projects. And what I mean by both sides of the roads, yeah, we can help it offset a little bit so that, when you scan, you're scanning from the back end, the front end, you're setting down the control, and that's it. Now, again, I want to make a point that, we don't have scans controls on in between the scans because we don't need it, right? So our registration workflow allows us to reduce the amount of control needed. So in the past, I just want to give you a quick number-wise, you were looking at least anywhere from 25 to 30 control here, right? So you get a resection and everything. Now, yeah, of course, our target, a scanner can detect controls up to 100 feet away. Or 200 feet away, but that being said, the longer the scanner has to take a target, you increase error, right? Because the scanner is because of the point spacing. If you don't have enough point on the target, it then picks the nearest point on the target. So therefore, there's not a center of the target, right? So we try to keep it within 50 feet of the scanner. And what I mean by that is, here we go. Yeah, so when we want to set the control, we want to scan it from approaching and then also departing, right? So before and after the control target, right? So you can see here on the top hand side, that's gonna be your best practice, right? And after you hit that control win twice from the first scan position and then the departing scan position, those controls are no longer needed. You can take them down. You can then leapfrog them to your next set of control that's 800 feet away. So you're scanning, all of a sudden, when you're near it, you then approach it by fine scanning it, and then you departure by fine scanning it again. That's going to be your best practice. And by doing this, you can also see if the control has moved or not too as well, right? So, and this is a good way for scanning control points out in the field. Again, before and after, twice on each control, and that's all you need to do. Those controls will be taken down, and you don't have to occupy them anymore. Now, during the automatic registration, onboard registration, you will at times, you could get an error, right? So to fix that error, what I did here is that you're gonna get something like this, right? Unstable scan position. What is this gonna do is that it is going to stop your registration because the scanner will not register because of this error, and it will fail, and I will prove it to you. Let me see, if I were to go, to this little scanner icon, if I were to just continue the scan, we'll wait. And over here under the task, you can see it's running. and we should get a fail. And I'm going to show you how to fix that fail prior to moving on. So if you want to keep up with the registration in the field, what you need to do is fix that failed position because it moved, or it's because you stop a scan in the middle of the scan. Never do that. Never cancel or stop a scan in the middle of a scan. Let it finish, because if you do, you're going to have to delete it. Because what the data does, what the scanner onboard registration does is that it analyzes the entire point cloud, it mixes voxel, and then it finds claims. Yeah. So if you did a scan, if you stop it right away, it then only has a little bit of an error search area, so therefore it's going to fail. There we go. 1 second here. Let me see if it's done. Still going, almost done. I'm going to show you how to fix the fail. I'm just refreshing it, right? So this is the refresh button. Nope, no test running. It worked. That's weird. It was supposed to fail. Okay. You know what? Let me leave this. It's supposed to fail. Let me just continue the scan of this project. I want to try to move it one more time. Let me see. Let me see. Go. Yeah, but nevertheless, this is what you want to do. You want to go ahead and go to your home screen. Go to your files. Click on this. You can have a bigger window. We're working on project today's date. So this is the 21st. You go in there, you double click in there, and then you just go down to your scan position 5, you select, and you hit delete. That's what you want to do. So before you even move, go back to the scan, click next scan position. No, sorry. Just click next scan, and then hit start. I'm going to show you that one more time. So for example, if you happen to cancel a scan like I'm doing right now, right? You want to go into the home, you want to go to files, and then you want to go to your project, which is right here, double click in it, and then you want to go to find that scan position, which is 5. You want to just click delete, yes. You want to go back to the scan icon and just click next scan and start. This is the 46-second scan, panorama 40. And another pro tip I want to give you is that when you're working along and you see that you're on scan position 50, and this right here says only 5, and sorry, if it says like 45, yeah, so there's the new scan. This one should be deleted. I don't know why it's not. What you want to do is that you want to refresh, and then this button right here will be green. You just click on it, and it will continue the registration, because the registration depends on the timing that you move from one scan position to another, right? So if the scanner senses that it's been sitting there for too long, the registration will stop, right? It's not a big deal. Just go to this little icon at the top, click on the refresh, and then continue the registration, and then continue to work as needed. Yep. Again, enable the onboard registration on the second scan position, and then select assume scenario, just like so, and then just continue to scan. Okay, but while you're scanning, and if the automatic registration times out, click on the project map icon, click on the refresh icon, and then click on the green register icon. Okay. Okay. So once your registration, once you scan all your data, your project, and it's completely done, you want to bring it back to the office. And for some reason, the scanner did not finish the registration. As you can see here, scan position 1 through 91 is all registered. How can I tell? It's because it has a globe next to it, right? That means it's registered either to the near neighboring scan position or both to some kind of coordinate system, which in this case is just GPS. But 92 to 95 is not registered. Don't worry, you can continue to register without starting over. You simply select the first couple of scans, neighboring scans that's already registered, and also then select the rest of the scan that hasn't been registered, and then simply go to your registration menu, select AR2, which stands for Automatic Scan Position 2, select your scenario, and then hit register, right? And then it will then tie the existing to, it would tie the non-registered scan position to the existing registered scan position, okay? All right, moving on. So after all your data is all registered, and our registration really good so that if it's not properly, if it's not right, you're gonna know. You know, and it's always best practice, of course, is to do some QA/QC, bring all your scan data in, look at the numbering. If it doesn't sequentially how you had order in the field, yeah, you might have one scan position that are out, but most likely, if it finished, it's gonna register everything properly. So then you can then go ahead and start on your automatic multisession 2 workflow, right? So multisession adjustment 2 workflow, and this is the workflow that ties your data down to server control. Now, if you don't have server control, and if this data is just an RGK, you go straight to number 5. Okay. Step 1 through 4, or 1 through 3. I don't use 4. 4 is just a visual that I really don't use at all. So you just go straight 1 through 5. You can see here, I'm on step number 1. You want to go ahead and configure your reflector settings, which this will allow you to select what type of reflector you're using out in the field. Now, you can use a combination of both, but please, if you do that, you should have multiple CSV file or control file that have control. For example, 1 through 10 uses a 50 millimeter, and 11 through X30 whatever uses a 10 centimeter cylindrical reflective target. So yeah, I always recommend, I highly recommend, and I only recommend to use the same type of target throughout the entire project, right? So this will then reduce any kind of error, just in case you forgot which target holds which type of prism or target. Control holds what type of target. And then once you and then go ahead, and once you have set your reflector type, go ahead and import them in by clicking on the green icon, which is step 1, generate type points. And as you can see, it would then import the type points into the list, right? The scan targets into the list. On the yellow deltas, these are all deltas. What this means is that the first 1 through 6 doesn't have any deltas. It's because you only saw that, you only scan that target from one position, right? And that's totally fine. You don't need to scan every single target twice. I'm talking best practice is to do it twice. But you can clearly see here on some position I didn't. Now the other ones, 1 through 8, where you see TP, that stands for tie point. That means you scan that target from 2 positions, from approach angle and departure angle, or approach scan position and departure scan position, right? And OP stands for observation points, and TP stands for tie points, right? So you see tie point here has some values in it. It's because the target here, that's the delta between the first position and the second position, and that tells you how much that target has moved, right? So in this case, the target has not moved at all. So if you do sense that a target has a high value, a tie point that has a high value, and then TP, not OP, TP, you may want to hover your mouse right over it, and by hovering your mouse over it, it will then tell you which scan position that hit that target, right? once you find that out, you can then go directly to the scan position and then either delete it, remove it, or uncheck the box in the TPL stocks, and then regenerate the type points again. That's how you remove targets that, for example, if you're at scan position 1, it's good, but then scan position 2, some wind came by and like kind of move that target a little bit, you'll see it. This is where you'll see it in the delta from each type points. But in this case, everything is really, really good. So we can go ahead and move on to step number 2, which then you can then import your server control to the TPL blocks. Now, I'm not going to go in detail about setting up coordinate system. That's going to be another webinar. Again, this is just efficiency and best practices out in the field. Yep. Again, import your server control from the blocks. If you do it from the LLC, which is a local level and coordinate system, which is like a engineered or calibrated coordinate system, we can do that too, but you have to set that up in advance in the Georeferencing Manager. If not, you must do it from the TPL blocks, and then make sure you select your coordinate system type. Make sure your northing and easting is proper, where the northing and easting value is correct. If not, you simply take the northing and drag it to where the easting is, and vice versa, the easting to where the northing is if it's flipped around. Yep. And go ahead and just hit OK, and you should see your control to come right in. All right. And then the third step, 3A, is to find the links. Okay. So let's just say if you have 13 controls out there, you don't want to put minimum numbers of targets 13. You may want to put just 10 or 8, right? It's not necessary. If you put all 13, it may not find them all. And that's okay if it doesn't, or it may not even find you a solution. That's why you don't want to put the exact number of targets that you're using out there, or rather the exact number of control that you're using out there. You want to put a few less. Like I said, if you're using 13, put 10 or 8. Yeah. Max distance tolerance. So if you're using GPS, you should be relatively close anyways. So it's safe to say you can put anywhere from a half meter or down to 10 centimeter, and you should be able to find a solution without any issue. If you don't find a solution, you may have to reduce the number of corresponding points, which let's just say 8, you may want to reduce it down to 6. And then your max distance, you may have to increase that up to a half a meter. But in this scenario, we were able to find targets perfectly. Yep. So it found 13 targets and at a very high low standard deviation. Oh, this is backwards. I must have flipped it. Sorry. But once you find a solution, you want to go ahead and hit accept and establish the links. Okay. And then moving on to step number 3. So once you establish and accept the links, you then populate a list down here. And then you move on to 3B, which then allows you to toggle your control, right? So again, if your control is very, very good and you want to rely on it, you want to put a higher emphasis on the control when it does the bundle adjustments or the fine-tune adjustment rather, you go ahead and mark them true, meaning that you're forcing them to the control no matter what. And if you have some test shots out there, uncheck them. Uncheck your test shot. Your QA/QC shots, uncheck the QA/QC and just check only the control. Yeah. You can toggle it all right there with the toggle button, or you can untoggle it by hitting none, and then you can do it manually too by just clicking on each control. Now down here under the links box at the bottom, if it does not find all your server control, you then want to check this little green icon right here. If you will see this little plus sign becomes green, that's telling you that, hey, it found X amount of type points, but there's a couple of observation points that it cannot find. You want to go ahead and check that, because during the final adjustment, step number 5, it will link them. Okay, but in this case, it found them all, so it did not give you an option to check the observation points. So this is perfect. Yep. All right, moving on, you want to then execute the block adjustment. So what happens is, like, just imagine building your puzzle on top of a table, and then you're taking that whole entire table or puzzle, and then you doing a block adjustment, which does a transformation and rotation down to your server control. Okay, Once you've done the execution, you then want to apply the results to the scan position in the LOC without the MSA2. And then you just click OK and then move forward to step number 5. Here's number 5. All right, so as soon as you click on step number 5, you're going to get this little tool or wizard that comes up. And this is self-explanatory, right? So control points in the CRS, this should automatically be checked because it sensed that there's server control. So you want to go ahead and it'll check that for you automatically. Leave that check. You want to then uncheck, or rather set the utilize GNSS to no, and then remove, and then also voxel outlier. Voxel size. That is simply your project scenario. As I explained earlier in the presentation, your scenario dictates the search radius of the voxels, and also the voxel size, and also the accuracy limitation. So by doing in an urban environment, it's having a long search because there's a lot of planes in long distance and farther distance, and also the voxel size are much larger because there's a lot larger planes. And don't worry, I've done this also in forestry too as well. When I say plane, it doesn't necessarily look for a flat surface of a building or a roof or road. You know, our search radius, our automatic registration algorithm, in my opinion, it has worked extremely well, and pretty much in any environment, whether you have planes or not plane surfaces like forestry, or in open pit mining, or in a scenario where you're having a long road and there's nothing on the side, as long as you have sufficient overlap. Again, overlap is king, right? So yeah, you can argue that, okay, so why have a scanner where we can only move 10 meters or 10 feet or whatever the case is? Who cares? It scans 45 seconds. Why not overkill the project? Therefore, by doing so, you will be confident that everything will register together properly, automatically, and without any failure. So, and then the other settings for matching method is points to planes. Never use points to plane unless you are in a forestry environment. Other than that, always use planes to planes. Okay, and then adjustment effort. Standard is highly recommended. Now there are high, rigorous, and extreme, right? It does the same thing. What it does is that it does multiple iteration of the adjustments. All this is just going to take a much longer time. I highly recommend just to put it on standard. If it doesn't work well, run it another time, because it doesn't start over. When you run step number 5 as many times as you can. It does not step over. All it does is run it to where it moved to, and then makes it better. Yeah. So I don't recommend doing extreme. It just takes forever. You can if you want, if you have the time to wait, but it's not necessary if you're doing your best practice out in the field, if you have enough server control, and also more importantly, if you have overlap scan data, sufficient overlap scan data. And then last but not least, setting, of course, full report. You can do different type of reports. We'll look at the reports in a little bit at the end, but over report level full, I highly recommend. And then show report, I don't recommend that. And it is not necessary. You can open it after it generates it. It's not a big deal. The reason why I don't show report, because your computer may not have the proper Adobe reader, and therefore it's going to fail to open it. And then you're going to say, hey, something failed. And all it is that if it failed towards that point, it's because they didn't find the proper Adobe reader. And the message is going to give you a clear-cut understanding of what failed. And also a note that sometimes this failed because you may not have the right Georeferencing Manager set up properly. Yeah. So yeah, again, everything is very sensitive, but nevertheless, if you do everything properly, it should work perfectly every single time. Okay. And then here, after you click start the adjustment, you see the algorithm running, and then you just go get a cup of coffee. 95 scan position. This thing took me roughly, I think, 20 minutes to do. So to run this last bit of again, I call it bundle adjustment. I call it a fine-tune adjustment, but this is called multisession adjustment too. Okay. All right, then moving on to some filter. So this is filter by attributes. There's 3 sets of filter I like to use. There are many more, but again, If we're just building roads, we need to send this off to the CAD guy. Hey, let's not waste our time cleaning this data up, right? So a lot of the third-party software out there can already do that automatically. But nevertheless, for presentations, for showing the client, it's always a good practice, and it's always a recommendation for me, and it's fast too as well, to do a deviation and reflectance deviation and reflectance filter, right? So deviation is what this get rid of the multiple time around, which get rid of the points that are flying off edges. And then reflectance points are more so for like points that are highly reflective. That's got a lot of noise before and after a highly reflective object, like a mirror or shiny pipes or aluminum or metal. Yep, it's always good. And these values I find are pretty standard across the board, right? So we'll get into deviation and reflectance another day, right? We don't have time for that today. But these are two highly recommended filters and settings. So make sure, more importantly, you select a greater than or equal to plus 20 in deviation, and reflectance is less than or minus 2, negative 20, and then more importantly, also match any of the following. This will apply to both attributes of each single point, and will clean your data up very nice for deliverables and presentation. And then the last filtering I want to show is the one-touch processing wizard. Now, I've done a couple webinar last year or previous year about these tools, and also about some detailed information about the filtering. And I will do this again later on in the year. But for now, one of the filters I've been asked about is the mark single point sources, right? So this filter will remove moving objects, right? And it's quite simple. We don't need a scan at each position twice, right? What it does is that when you scan at one position, and when you move to the next scan position, you scan again. If you have enough overlap, now, which you should, because that's part of your best practice, field best practice, the software and the filtering algorithm will know that objects that was not seen in the second object was seen in the first object, was not seen in the scan position 2 and was seen in scan position 1, will automatically be indexed into a different category, yeah? So it will allow you to toggle on and off, which I'll show you in a little bit in the data, to toggle on and off. It does not delete it, right? You can delete that later, but all it does is just kind of like what you would call it, classified in a sense, right? It classifies moving object versus non-moving object, and it puts it in the same scan position as the file in each scan position. Yep. And you just run this wizard. These are the values that I find that's been optimized for people walking by and for moving vehicles and such. Yeah. So these are pretty optimized for building out such objects. Okay. So that's where you can find the settings, and then we can talk more about and I will do another presentation because this will take me again another full presentation just to do it on a task and one-touch processing wizard on its own. Okay. So just to summarize the project, I did 1 mile width of frontage road, 2 lanes, eastbound, westbound, total 16 server control. Again, I start the project at one end with 2 server control. I hit it from the front, I hit it from the back. I scan with no control, about 800 feet. I got another set of control. I scan those 2 in from the approaching angle and from the departing angle, and then I move on, and then I end the project on 2 server control 2 as well. Best practice was setting your project setup every 100 feet on a mile-long road, and also on both sides of the roads. And then on this particular project, I tripod this thing at 95 scan position. Again, when you're out in the field, stuff's different, stuff's changed, right? It doesn't look like it's Google Map anymore. So you might have objects in the way. Again, these scans are a line of sight. You cannot scan accordingly to your project plan, but it gives you a very good scale, an understanding, and also a good perspective on what the scope of the project will be like. But then again, I planned it in 75 scan position. I ended up doing 95 scan position. It took me roughly 3 hours of scan time. Post-processing register took me another 2 hours to output a deliverable into a LES or not E57. E57 takes a long time to export, right? So this gets me to the point of just exporting right before I export the data into a LES, LAZ platform. So before I end the project, It didn't finish. Unfortunately, I was hoping that it would finish on time, but I guess it didn't. But I was going to show you. But if you'd like to, I can show you the before and after. I think we've done a presentation on this tool before so that you can see that when it does remove the vegetation and it does not, sorry, when it removes the vehicle and when it does not, before and after the filtering tool has been set. So, yeah, so based on that summary, my time is up. I went a little bit longer than I should, but then I always do. But yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions. Yeah, I will go ahead and open up for questions. Okay. Well, as I'm waiting for a question, I'll give it a couple more minutes because I know people's got to type them. Yeah, let me show you the failed one, right? So you see how this one failed. Then I just go to scan position. I go to the home button. I go to files, and then you click on this little tab right here where it says destination. Is to expand your project folder. You want to click on the project that you're currently working on. Then you want to just double click it. You go down to the scan position, that file that failed. Let's do that. And let's go ahead and just delete it. Okay, hit yes. And then I'm going to go ahead and go back to the registration icon. I'm going to do something called a refresh. And I'm just going to go ahead and continue scanning. Okay, I do see a question. Let me see. All right. Some more information in filtering single points and moving objects would be nice, especially the settings. Yeah, so as I scan, there's really not much to go more into. This is the settings for it, right? So that's, you know, feel free to take a screenshot and use the settings. There's really not more into it. Again, whatever is seen in the first scan position and was not seen in the second scan position or third scan position, it will go ahead and just categorize it in the toggle setting that you can flip on and off. So there's really not more to it. But yeah, I understand your concern. So I will note that, and in my next webinar on going over all the tasks in a one-touch processing wizard workflow, I will then explain it more in detail. Okay, so when this is done, let me see. So there we go. Now I can go ahead and hit refresh. Let me see. Let me just go back into this folder. Up one. Double click on there. 7, 4, 5, 6. It shouldn't. Well, maybe I need to take another one. Let me just take another scan. There we go. Let's do 8. Questions: do we need targets reflectors in the field? It turns out more efficient to just have enough overlap. No, you only need targets if you have survey control. Okay, so Lynn, if you don't have survey control, you do not need targets. Overlap and GPS is perfectly fine. So no, you do not need server control out in the field, okay? Only when you have control that you need to reference your data to. Let me see another question. Claudio, thank you. Does the same function work to remove people? Yes, it does. Yeah, so the filter and the and tasks that I showed you, task number 7 in the one-touch processing workflow, yes, that is exactly what it's for. It removes people and moving objects from the field. Yes. Let me see. When you were talking about fine scan targets before and after, if you do 4 scans using the same 6 targets for the entire projects, do you only have to fine scan the 6 targets 2 times? Yes, that is correct. If you have 6 targets total in the field, you do not need to see the targets for control from every position. You just need to start on targets and you need to end on target and supplement some in the middle with targets. And a fine example of what I did was that I had 16 targets total on 5,280 feet. I think that's a mile. 5,200, 5,240, 5,280. It's over 5,000 feet. You only need to see again the targets twice at approach angle and at the departure, and that's it. And then scans in the middle too as well. So if I were to bring, let me go back to my PowerPoint, right? So let's go back over here. Let me see. Here we go. Yeah, if I were to, so for example, my first scan position, I hit those two targets, right? I scan with no targets. About 800 feet later, I see that target right there. So that's where it is. So I hit that scan twice, the targets twice from each scan position, from two scan position, that's it. And then same thing, I move until I see another set of targets. I hit it in twice, before and after, and then down the line and towards the end, I just hit it 2 more times, and that's it. Hope that answered your questions. If not, write me an email and we'll clarify it. All right, is scanning reflectors over 50 feet not recommended? Yeah, if you were to ask for a recommendation, I keep it between 50 and 75 feet, less than 75 feet. Sure, you can scan it out to 100 feet if you like, but again, the further you go out, the higher the error you're going to have on the target, right? Because what happens is that when the scanner does a fine scan, and that's what we call it, right? We call it a fine scan, F-I-N-E. It then dictates its own resolution, which is the angular resolution, and it puts so much targets on there that it then selects the center of the target if there's a point there. But if you're out too far, your point space is going to be too large, so there it picks a neighboring point, right? So to have the best practice, you want to keep it less than 75 feet. That's going to be your best practice, and you should have no problem scanning and registering your target well within 75 feet. And that question goes out to Mr. Eric. And then one more question, Jared Martin. Would anything special needed to be done when transitioning between indoor and outdoor scanning? Yes. So when you're doing an indoor-outdoor project, its best practice is to start outdoor, right? So when you go indoor, you want to scan at the, you can stop the registration. So for example, let's see, if I were to go here, so I just put here, I would refresh and I go ahead and continue my registration. Let's say as it's registering, you can cancel it, right? You want to scan in between the door jam, approaching the door jam, and then right after the door within, let's just say 5 feet, right? So 5 feet before the door, right in the middle of the door jam, and then 5 feet after the door jam. Again, overlap's king. But then you can then stop the registration, do this refresh. You can then, go to your workflow settings, right? Go directly to your workflow settings, go to your registration settings, do this, and then check the scene you want to do it on, uncheck, and then go to your registration icon, and then just continue the registration by hitting register. So you just change your workflow setting in the registered, and then it would then do a indoor search instead of an outdoor search. So yeah, there's a little bit of work, but I find it to that I've done outdoor projects in urban environments, and when I bring it indoor, I have forgotten to change the indoor scenario, and I was still able to get very good results. Okay. All right, so I think that concludes my presentation and also questions. So thank you everybody for your attention. And if you have more detailed questions that you would like to know and want to know more about what we do and how we're doing it, please email our info or to myself, And yeah, and I'll be happy to answer them and work with you. And if you want to find more, if you're new to the RIEGL products and want to take a closer look, please reach out to us and we will provide you as much information as we can. All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day. And yeah, enjoy scanning. Cheers.